So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today in this discussion about the role of clerks and secretary-generals in parliaments on driving legislative modernization. As you know, I'm Luís Kimaid. I'm the executive director of Bússola Tech. We are a global think tank that works in the promotion of legislative modernization and digital transformation. It's my honor and my pleasure to welcome esteemed friends and colleagues here today in this panel, starting with Eric Janse. He is the clerk of the House of Commons of Canada. And we have Kevin McCumber, the clerk of the US House of Representatives. James Pinnell, the deputy head of programs of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, the CPA. And Vergottini, the CEO of Xcential Technologies. We are going to conduct our panel with a series of questions that I, as the moderator, I'm going to bring for our esteemed panelists to get their sense about their experience and expertise on how to drive forward legislative modernization in their positions as the clerks and their parliaments, in case of James, who kindly accepted our invitation as the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in driving these innovations through interparliamentary diplomacy, and with Vergottini as our technology expert in the panel. Before I start, I'd like to yield the floor very briefly for 1 minute for each one of our panelists to introduce themselves. I understand the majority of colleagues here today know you, but for those that are not familiar with you and with your work, I'll yield the floor for each one of you for you to introduce yourself. Eric, would you like to start introducing yourself for the colleagues?
Sure, it would be my pleasure, and thank you very much, Luís, for the invitation. So greetings from Ottawa. I mentioned a bit earlier, the snow is almost gone here, so that's a good thing as far as we're concerned. I have been clerk of the House of Commons for about 2 years now, but I've been working at the House of Commons for some 33 years, so have seen a lot of change politically, change in terms of technology, and we expect more change as we have an election coming up very soon on the 28th of April. And looking forward to that. And of course, very much looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric, for your participation today and for your introduction. Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself for the colleagues as well?
Certainly, and thank you, Luís, for inviting me to participate today, and good day to you all. I'm honored to join this distinguished panel and contribute some thoughts to this discussion. I was sworn in as clerk this past January after serving as acting clerk since July of 2023. Before that, I've served in many positions within the organization as a journal clerk, a tally clerk, deputy chief, and deputy clerk, giving me a unique opportunity to lead an organization from which I've worn many hats. I'm looking forward to learning from others on the panel and spending the next 90 minutes with you all. Thanks again, Luís.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for your participation and also for your introduction for the colleagues. I'd like to yield the floor to James. James, would you like to introduce yourself for the colleagues as well?
Yeah, thank you very much, Luís. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world that you are. Yep, James Pinnell from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. As Luís said, I'm deputy head of programs. I specifically have the remit to look after all of our multilateral engagements. The CPA is a multilateral organization, so that includes quite a lot of things, including all of our thematic work. And more recently, that's included technology, innovation, and modernization of our member parliaments. Always a pleasure to be here at Bússola Tech events and to represent the CPA. My attendance has always been virtual, but I'm looking forward to hopefully one day joining for an in-person session. And we will be in your hemisphere later this year, Luís, for our Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference in Barbados, which we're really looking forward to, and at which I think we'll be discussing modernisation of parliaments as well.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you for participating today with us and for sharing this brief introduction. Grant, would you like to do the same and introduce yourself for the colleagues as well?
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you, Luís, as always, for the invitation. I'm Grant Vergottini. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Xcential Legislative Technologies. We've been in the business now for 23 years, building legislative systems, modernizing legislative systems, starting in California and working around the world, the US House of Representatives, the UK, Hong Kong, and elsewhere. I'm also work closely with the University of Bologna on the definition of the Comentoso standard. And I'm a member of the OASIS technical committee that shepherds legal DocML or Comentoso through the process.
Thank you so much, Grant, for participating with us here today and also for your introduction. As I mentioned before, I have drafted a few questions to start our discussion. And I'll yield the floor to each one of you for the time of 5 minutes to answer with your considerations. And I'd like to start first with you, Kevin. We know that sometimes in parliaments, different business areas and even members of Congress, members of Parliament, they can come up with innovative ideas, using new technologies or not, or even proposing a new way to work to modernize the Parliament. And they would bring it to you as the clerk. And my question to you is, what are the key considerations should a clerk or a secretary general take into account before considering approving or rejecting such an initiative, either from a head of an agency, a head of a department, or a member of Congress or member of Parliament that they might bring to you? If you want to use the floor to share your thoughts.
Certainly, and thank you for the question. So a few key considerations that we keep in mind, whether it's a request coming from a member, a committee, individual staffer, or a request by either our support staff across campus or another support agency, is, does it impact rules, traditions, and procedure, the value and impact, ownership, basic project and product management? So does it impact rules, traditions, and procedure? One thing that I would recommend is that everybody make sure that any proposal aligns with your institution's individual rules, traditions, and practices. It's something that we certainly keep at top of mind when, even at the very preliminary stages of discussion about a modernization effort, is what sort of impact will this have on those things that we all hold so dear and do our best to keep in place. For the value and impact, does the proposal add value? Does it move our institutions forward? What problem does it solve? Does it negatively or positively impact our operations? And will it be used? If it's something that support staff feel very strongly about, does that translate into being used by members and staff or committees? So it's balancing that approach and making sure that we're going after tackling the right problems at the right time with the right solution. For the ownership, who is driving the proposal or the initiative? Why is it even a topic? Is it something that an issue that we face house-wide? Is it unique to a committee? Is it unique to members? Those types of things. Who needs to be consulted? Do the members need to be asked about it? What about leadership or our oversight committees? Or is it something that I, as the clerk, can make a decision on? There's very few things that modernization-wise that are within my own scope outside of internal processes, because everything else touches so many different systems and processes and members and committees and the like. And then, are there any political sensitivities, or is what's being proposed a bipartisan initiative with broad and general support of the members? And what can't be lost either is the basic project and product management. So in our efforts to follow the best practices of project management and product manager, do we have the resources in terms of time, staff, and money, not just the initial getting the product moving forward or initiated, but do we have the long-term sustainment in place in mind to be able to keep this product supported long-term? And again, what are the project risks? So and who's going to have the most benefit from this. So there's a lot of key considerations that we certainly keep in mind and offer when we have these consultations with our committees and leadership members. And sometimes it's just educating on what's available, what our resources in place currently can help with, or can we make minor tweaks? Sometimes it's the minor tweaks to an existing platform that make the biggest differences in another staffer's day-to-day, whether that's what's the default field when you open up a window. Is it something that every staff member is having to change the default in a drop-down menu because it's not where it should be landing on the right page when you open it? That's an easy fix for us, and that makes a world of difference. So sometimes it's just continuing those communications and really understanding what problem you're trying to solve. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Kevin, for your considerations on this topic. And I'd like to invite Eric to share your comments as well. Eric, I understand that you are quite involved in this discussion as well in the House of Commons. I see amazing work being done by your fellow colleagues, Natalie Foster, with Chris Henry as well, on initiatives like the citizen developments, on decentralizing these initiatives. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this question as well, and what are your considerations?
Sure. Thanks very much, Luis. And certainly what Kevin just said certainly resonated with me, and I'm sure with others as well. But I'd maybe like to take just one quick step back, because we're talking about modernization. And I sometimes think it's possible, or perhaps even desirable, to reframe the idea of modernization, as it sometimes might leave the impression that parliaments, or our parliaments, are not modern. So while obviously we have to balance parliamentary tradition and innovation in our workplaces, I don't see modernization as the main goal per se, but rather would reframe it as an exercise in continuous improvement. So it's an ongoing process of incremental and sustainable refinement. So given that point of view, it's important for me as clerk that technology should not necessarily be seen as the sole driving force behind change, but rather that we should focus on outcomes as an organization. So sometimes these outcomes might require the implementation of technology, but often a simple review of a process to simplify it or streamline it, or even just to document it, can go a long way in terms of delivering value to members of parliament or to the public that we ultimately serve. So having reframed modernization a little bit more as continuous improvement, I'd like to share some of what we at the House of Commons do to prepare for or evaluate major change initiatives. So first of all, we have a corporate continuous improvement team. So this is a small but mighty team that's embedded in the clerk's office that offers its services to any team at the House of Commons that wants to review a process or streamline workloads or question the roadblocks that impede organizational efficiency. So this is often a first good, important step in any major modernization initiative, and can certainly help bring together a variety of cross-functional teams to consider how a process can be improved. So sometimes just this exercise in itself is sufficient to make positive incremental change, but in other cases, it provides a baseline for a new way of working, which may lead to a business proposal for a major initiative, which often includes some kind of technology. Second, the House of Commons also has what we call our Corporate Planning Advisory Group. So I set this up in 2023. It's made up of leaders from across the service areas of the House to ensure organizational alignment for major initiatives. So the group reviews major projects according to a prioritization framework that it developed, and it's considering value or benefit to the organization on one hand, for example, alignment with our strategic plan, mitigation of corporate risks, value for members of parliament, projected long-term savings, versus or against effort on the other hand. So investment of money, resources, human resources, IT resources, the time, the complexity, and ongoing operational costs. So having benefited from their analysis and consideration of major initiatives, their recommendations to me and my senior leadership team make me better equipped to determine whether we are investing in the right places and at the right time. While we are continuously looking to improve or mature this model, it's far from perfect. It's already allowed for more aligned strategic discussions at many levels in the organization and gives us a better sense of how to allocate our limited resources in the service of members and the institution. The other piece of this puzzle would be that of measurement. There are two elements here that I'd like to briefly highlight. First, before implementing any project, it's difficult to know where you want to go or judge your success if you do not know where you stand today, currently. So it's important to have a clear problem statement in mind and to support that problem statement with data. This is the type of approach we'd like to embed more strictly into our own corporate planning process as it continues to mature. Second, it's important to measure as you deliver the project, not only to report whether you are on time and on budget, which is kind of our current practice, but to also measure whether through implementation you've made meaningful progress toward addressing your problem statement and the associated data. So in taking these two elements together, as clerks and leaders of parliamentary institutions, I think we're well placed to not only recognize projects of high value, but to ensure that our resources are deployed to solving problems in real time, which can give us the agility to recognize when we might need to change course or to outright double down on a project or opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for your considerations. Very interesting points that you brought regarding your journey into the modernization and even using emerging technologies in the House of Commons. I'd like to give the floor to James Pinnell from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. James, please feel free to use the floor to comment on this matter as well.
Yeah, thanks once again, Luís. I was actually planning to caveat all my contributions by recognizing the far more authoritative and insightful perspectives that both Kevin and Eric are able to provide. They're infinitely more qualified than I can ever hope to be on the role of the clerk and the Secretary-General of Parliament. But actually, a number of things that they mentioned are actually some of the things I was looking to also discuss. So that's hugely reassuring for me, and I hope there's value add still from my contributions to everybody joining. I think first and foremost, there needs to be consideration about whether the modernisation initiatives align with the Parliament's strategic objectives. I think any initiative, however innovative it's looking to be, fundamentally needs to serve the broader goals of the Parliament. Whether that might be strengthening legislative functions, increasing transparency, improving efficiencies, building public trust, all of the above, even better. I think we need to ask, does this project genuinely enhance the core work of lawmaking, scrutiny, and representation? I don't think it can be innovation for innovation's sake. Or an attempt to keep up in the abstract. I think there's a lot of dialogue out there at the moment about keeping up with technological trends, but sometimes knowing what not to do is as good as knowing what to do. I think as part of that, there needs to be some consideration around institutional readiness and capacity. I think modernisation isn't just about implementing new tools in a vacuum. It's about changing methods and modes and ways of working. So thinking about things like whether they're the human resources, the training structures, organizational cultures that are needed to implement the changes and also maintain those new changes and methods of working. Is it possible to sustain them? And I think if a new system is introduced with adequate buy-in, the skills development, the training, as I think Kevin very rightly said, it risks sitting on a shelf. In preparing for this webinar, I actually learned a new word today, shelfware, so software and hardware that sits on a shelf. I think absolutely there needs to be consideration of cost versus value. I don't necessarily mean that in a strictly financial sense, but also in terms of complexity. I think Eric spoke about modernisation and what this means. Absolutely. I don't think it has to necessarily be these disruptive technologies of the fourth and fifth industrial revolutions, the artificial intelligence. They can often be, or it can often be the case that some of the most impactful innovations are low-cost process changes, better internal coordinations, efficiencies in approaches to work. So yeah, when you think about return on investment, again, not just finance or financially, but in terms of time saved, quality of work, what are the efficiencies we're trying to achieve? I think also when approaching these sorts of initiatives and taking a decision, I think risk does need to be at the forefront of our minds. I sometimes get accused of stakeholders and colleagues and partners of doom-mongering a little bit about technology, and I'm consciously trying to avoid doing that. But I think clerks and secretaries-general should be mindful of cybersecurity vulnerabilities, information integrity, but also just fundamental business continuity. If these projects are being implemented, are the core operations of Parliament going to be impacted to a greater or lesser extent? And let's be honest, if the initiative fails or doesn't meet expectations, is there a fallback plan or a mitigation strategy? And I think finally, and this is something that's very core to a lot of what the CPA does, thinking about inclusivity and accessibility. Clerks need to ensure that any innovation supports and doesn't hinder diverse participation in parliamentary work. So will the change make it easier or harder for members with disabilities to engage? Will it improve citizens' access to information, or will it exacerbate digital divides? I think often we can commit the fallacy of thinking that more tech makes things easier to access and consume. But actually, there are people who don't have digital literacy. We do have people who live in very rural constituencies. So sometimes deployment of technology can increase alienation and disenfranchise those. Again, it's excellent to have Eric from Canada here, because if we think about bilingual parliaments, are different languages being catered for? Are they being catered for in the same way? I think that's really important. And then I think finally, I promise the last point is going to be my final one, but just to try and shoehorn something else in if I still have the time. I don't think this could be top down or bottom up. I think everybody needs to be able to feed into these kinds of conversations, and I think clerks and secretaries-general should help to facilitate dialogue, identify others who can also facilitate dialogue between members, between staff, with technical teams, digital services within parliaments. I think whilst good initiatives and successful projects have clear ownership, I think they also need wide consultation and some semblance of shared accountability and responsibility for the success. So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts, Luís. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for your considerations. You touched on very interesting points. For example, the three verticals that we usually work with on modernization, which is gaining efficiency, openness, and resilience. I agree with everything. A business-oriented modernization also. And just one last point before I yield the floor to Grant. Sometimes having a discussion on how to modernize a procedure or how to modernize a rules of procedure goes a much longer way than using AI or using any other new technology. So I completely agree and echo everything you just said about that. Grant, would you like to share your comments on this matter as well?
Yes, thanks, Luís. I'm going to perhaps echo a few of the things Eric said, but I'm in a different position. I see the projects that come our way are projects that have already been approved, the projects that have made it through and are now being bid, and we're bidding on them. And there are a few things that come through that almost consistently. We see projects that have inevitably been put off for years and years and years. They've gotten to the point where now they are urgent. They're replacing hardware or software or both that's been out of production for a decade or more. And now it's absolutely crucial that a successful project come along to replace them. The second thing that I notice is that usually these systems are 20 to 30 years old. These are replacement projects. And no one's really noticed or appreciates how much has been built in those 20 to 30 years, and inevitably underestimate the complexity of replacing the system. it's always going to be far more complex, far more costly than you ever would have thought. And that's because a lot of it's work that was done piecemeal, and it was done one way or another without really accounting for the cost. A better approach is not to look for, we call these big bang projects, where everything's going to be replaced at once. And that's ensuring that it's going to be the most costly approach, and it's going to be the riskiest approach. You're almost ensuring that something's going to go wrong. And it's going to take so long, sometimes 5 years, sometimes 6, 7 years, to build the system that you're guaranteed a system that itself will start becoming obsolete before it even gets out the door. A better approach, and the approach that we like to promote, is that piecemeal approach. A legislative system should always be a work in progress. Parts of it should be being replaced constantly as they age out, rather than trying to stack it all up and do it in one big project every 10, 15, 20 years. I think that's the biggest thing I would like to see different, is less focus on big projects infrequently and more of a constant stream of projects, changing this and changing that for one reason or another, whether it's benefits, technology, age out, or whatever, just being more on top of the software as it's being built rather than waiting.
Thank you, Grant, for your considerations. I completely agree and echo everything you just said about having a modular approach to when modernizing or creating a system. In addition to what you said, there is one additional element that we usually see. You have early wins to show results for the members, for the society. You know, it's worth modernizing. It's worth spending valuable parliamentary resources, financial resources, time resources to perform such a project. So I completely agree with everything you just said. And that gives me the line to bring the next question to you, Eric. In your view, what are the benefits and challenges of, let's say, embedding these modernization principles, such as, I know in the House of Commons in Canada, accessibility is a very important principle on user experience, but also, let's say, AI integration, and also an improved legislative infrastructure directly into the rules of procedure of the Parliament. And in your view, Eric, how can clerks and secretary-generals ensure that such provisions translate into meaningful and sustainable improvements for the House?
Great. Yeah, no, excellent question, Luís. Thank you. So at the House of Commons, and I'm sure it's the same in most parliaments, our rules of procedure, of course, are codified in our standing orders. And these formal rules, though, are supplemented with practices that have been adopted and embedded over time, as well as precedents developed through a series of speakers' rulings during the course of a parliament. So the rules themselves belong to the members, and the speaker's role, of course, is to ensure that they're enforced and respected. So then that leaves us, the clerks, our role is to provide advice on the collection of formal rules, practices, and precedents, but not necessarily to define what they should be. So with that said, from time to time, our advice is sought in determining how to appropriately embed new principles or ideas into the rules to ensure coherence, or to point out to members where further decisions or actions might be required as a result of changes to the rules. So the most pertinent example, and again, I'm sure one that all those attending today can relate to, is in relation to new practices, or entirely new practices in our rules that came about because of the global pandemic. That saw many of us need to adapt our practices overnight to respond to a constantly evolving situation. So while the rules themselves were traditionally silent on technology, suddenly we were faced with a variety of new questions. How would we adapt the rules for members to appear virtually? How do we introduce technology to enable remote voting? How do the clerk and other table officers support the speaker and other members of Parliament as they adapt to these changes? So in this particular case, an incremental approach worked well at the House of Commons. So rather than making immediate permanent changes, and this goes maybe a little bit to what Grant just spoke to, rather than making immediate permanent changes, we adopted practices through a series of special orders that temporarily altered our rules. So it was an incremental approach. This allowed for both members and the House administration to adapt to the introduction of new technology, both for participation in debate and voting, and to learn along the way. So in doing so, we were able to identify the procedural rules that truly needed to be adapted. Let's sought to find the right balance between codifying certain practices and being overly prescriptive in our rules, such that they would not be able to stand the test of time. So a good example of this principle is in relation to our e-voting application, which allows members of Parliament to vote by secure mobile phone from any location within Canada. So we work closely with members of all parties to develop and launch this application during the COVID-19 pandemic. And actually in 2023, a majority of members voted to make it a permanent feature of our standing orders. However, rather than codifying the specific technology, process, or workflow, we've only sought to codify the main principles that underpin such a voting system. So this ensures that members are able to define the basic minimum requirements of such a system. For example, the rules allow members to vote either in person or electronically, requiring members to vote from within Canada and to validate their identity visually in order to allow technical issues to be addressed by the whips. So at the same time, being largely silent on the nature of technology itself, the House administration and its members leaves the appropriate space for continuous improvement and modernization of the way in which electronic voting is conducted. Of course, to us, this makes perfect sense because the technology changes so quickly. So with this approach, we tried to strike, or we hope we've struck the right balance between codifying the important principles while leaving space for future improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your considerations. I could not emphasize more how important it is what you just said in this panel. Not codify specific technology or a group of technologies, rather the principle that enables the use of that technology for a specific moment. Because today, I mean, as you mentioned, 5 years ago, we had remote deliberations. Now we are discussing artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. We have absolutely no idea what would be the discussion, let's say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. But if the rules are already codified to encompass and allow these discussions, this is of the utmost importance. Absolutely important at this point. And Eric, thank you so much for your contributions. I'd like to invite Kevin now for sharing your considerations. I recently read that the recent House rules also incorporated elements of artificial intelligence and machine-readable documents in the House. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well, because I know the US House is working very hard on using these new technologies as well. Please feel free to use the floor, Kevin.
Thanks, Luis. And I too would just like to stress the importance of what Eric just said, because so much of it is applicable to us and other legislatures and parliaments around the world. A lot of it is the relationships that we have built with our colleagues on the Rules Committee to give us the space to find the problem and then give us the space to be able to mold a solution that addresses the need without locking us into a specific solution. And I think those ongoing conversations and collaborations at the start of a new Congress in the House, our rules are start anew every 2 years. And so while we use the existing rules to build off of and make improvements, we have conversations leading up to a new Congress with our Rules Committee to learn what ideas they have in mind and then go to work implementing a solution. We always try to get to yes whenever we're asked to do something. So I would just like to give an example, and Luis mentioned that we do have a multi-year project underway now to make sure that our documents are in machine-readable formats. But before that, we had to take on the challenge of just simply making those documents available in the first place. And an example with some benefits and challenges of making those available, House rules, there was a rule requiring posting legislative documents, and therefore members and staff are now following uniform House rules by posting the documents and other materials on our committee repository. So for the committee repository, House rules say certain material needs to be posted on a central online repository managed by us in the clerk's office. It does not tell us how we needed to do that by prescribing a specific tech solution. The provision in the rules tells us what conduct of business should be done, certain material to be posted for public availability, whether it's witness lists, biographies, statements, those types of things, but it did not tell us the how. So the how is the actual system used to upload the documents that my office maintains and then trains the staff, committee staff to use. So this could be a challenge if not presented in this way, where we're prescribed a specific tech solution and then we have to kind of make it work to fit the need. So we had the benefit of being able, having that flexibility and latitude to address the rule in a way that works across the House. So again, here in the House, we've seen the benefit with our website. The committee repository is docs.house.gov. It has two sides to public-facing website. The first side is Bills This Week, and this is a site that hosts the legislative proposals or the bill text for the legislation that may come to the House floor in any given week. And the second side is for committee documents related to committee hearings. So without the requirement for posting material online at the centralized repository, finding these documents would be challenging. Before this website, some versions of legislation were only available in the chamber at the rostrum. And so with this change, everyone has access, including the public. So this translated into meaningful work as the House rules were modified over 3 Congresses to ensure that the rules were clear on what my office had to provide, the tools to upload the documents, and the publicly available website. And the rules are also clear as to what the committees must do. The boundaries and the roles are stated right there inside the rules. So having these requirements in the rules ensures that these items have been declared an institutional priority or policy and sticks around regardless of majority change or which party is in control. And for technical solutions, it shows that we're moving away from a paper-only process, as has been mentioned at previous panels before by myself and others on the clerk's team. We continue to add that digital layer to our centuries-old paper process. One thing that I like to stress is that while we are still paper-based, we've added a digital layer that allows the tracking of legislation online throughout every step of the process, from introduction to referral, to committee markup, to committee reporting, to House floor consideration, amendments that are offered, the Rules Committee prior to House floor consideration. When it's sent over to the Senate, every step along the way is published online overnight on congress.gov and allows full transparency on a piece of legislation and what action the House has taken. So I wish I could just say ditto to what Eric said, because it's so important, and he highlighted everything of importance, certainly that I track, and just wanted to add this little piece of additional information that might be helpful. Thanks, Luís.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for your contributions. And I think there is a very important point here that you highlight, following on Eric's reasoning about the procedures not being so specific that would hinder innovation. I'm interpreting what you said, of course, please correct him if I'm mistaken, but as your office arbitrating what the rules would consent or allow you to do. And on the other hand, you have the committee staff, you have your staff, and you have the requirements for user experience. So is your office doing the arbitration? Okay, what does the rule allow me to do? And on the other hand, what does staff members and the users in general want me to do? So how can I seek out the solution in the market, or how can we develop this internally? So I see the clerk's office, in your case, what you're describing, doing the middle ground here, connecting these 2 dots and make it possible to be compliant with the rules, and then at the same time not being so, how can I say this, so fixed, and having some flexibility of moving to answer to the specific demands. James, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts on this point as well. Please feel free to use the floor.
Yeah, thanks so much, Luis. Again, this is a great vote of confidence in my notes to hear that Eric and Kevin have said some of the things that I also have given some consideration to. Yeah, I think embedding modernisation principles into rules of procedure or standing orders can be a powerful enabler, but also can be a complex undertaking. Yeah, I think when such principles are codified in standing orders, they're no longer just optional ad hoc project-based concepts. They become part of the Parliament's formal operations and framework, which should, at least in part, ensure that modernisation efforts aren't dependent on particular personalities within the parliamentary leadership or political will that can speed up, slow down, stop or reverse modernisation, but are instead, in principle, at least more embedded. You can always sort of amend them again, but at least in principle, somewhat embedded. I think I very much agree with everything that Eric said around it needing to be principles rather than specific technologies. I think codifying technologies, especially though, we all know now that technologies rapidly evolve. They sometimes exponentially grow in terms of their capabilities and their powers. So yeah, I think rules have to be written in a way that sets high-level principles, things like transparency, inclusion, and efficiency that I mentioned in my earlier contributions, while allowing for that flexibility that Eric very rightly mentioned. In terms of implementation, I was very fortunate to be in Ottawa, in Canada last year, where I got to see the electronic voting happening live. It was a fantastic innovation to watch. But yeah, I think attempting to tie rules of procedure too closely to certain technologies, very much counterintuitive, and speaking frankly, potentially a waste of time and effort. I think also a challenge can be that there's a risk of updating rules, procedure, and standing orders before you're frankly ready. I think it's one thing to amend rules, procedure, or standing orders to mandate certain modernizations. It's another thing to ensure that the infrastructure's there, the training's taken place, you have data governance policies in place to make it meaningful. I think without investment in those sorts of things, there's a risk of running before you walk and possibly even failing. And I think also in terms of institutional resistance as well, I think specifically thinking about the staff more than the sort of political opposition amongst members, I think staff might be cautious about changes that affect workflows or even certain job roles. I think it's a conversation that's happened a lot around job security in the face of things like AI, and I think we need to be honest that parliaments aren't immune to it. So reassuring people and building buy-in has to be cognizant of that. So when you are embedding them in rules of procedure, embedding them in the standing orders, having that institutional commitment, I think you need to make sure you're taking everyone with you. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how clerks and secretaries-general can ensure that provisions translate into real improvements, I think, yep, just to reiterate the point that's been made almost ad nauseum at this point, yes, champion a principle-based approach. Yeah, that innovation, accessibility, transparency without prescribing specific technologies and allowing for adaptability as tools evolve. Making sure it's part of a strong implementation strategy. This embedding them in the rules of procedure is at the appropriate time in the implementation strategy. And again, I'll come back to the inclusivity part of it. I think successful implementation shouldn't be imposed. I think it should be co-created. I think there should be consultation. We at the CPA, we have our benchmarks for democratic legislatures, and within those we talk about near unanimity when it comes to amending rules of procedure and standing orders. So I think having that inclusive dialogue really speaks to that and can help build legitimacy when you do embed those changes. So yeah, to summarize, very much echoing Kevin and also Eric, and that, yeah, rules of procedure can be very powerful levers for modernisation, but only if they're part of a wider ecosystem of sort of implementation and modernisation.
Thank you, James, for your considerations. Very important point that you brought here. And here we have two very successful cases in Parliament on being democratic, on how to move forward with the modernization process. The House of Commons is very well known to include its business leaders from the Parliament, its colleagues, staff as well, on sharing their views, even developing, as I mentioned at the beginning, some of its tools with the citizen development, which I'm not sure if it's still on, Eric, please correct if I'm wrong. And with Kevin as well at the US House, someone from his staff, Kirsten Gullickson, coordinates the task force for modernization of the US House as well. So we have two very good examples here on how to involve staff, and also, as James just mentioned, their initiatives and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I completely agree. Absolutely important to involve, not only for its own sake, but also to get their expertise and their knowledge about those specific process that those colleagues are working on for years and if not decades. So, Grant, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Sure. This question is actually getting at a tension that we constantly feel as we build out systems. On one hand, we have to focus on supporting the rules and traditions that exist in a process that was essentially a paper-based process. As Kevin said, we're adding a digital layer over the top of a paper-based process. Inevitably, the pressure is to support that paper-based process. Although we want to go more towards the digital process. So we're constantly having to find some middle ground between those. We favor the paper-based process because in our field, tradition tends to hold quite firmly. Now we've gotten to this point where suddenly there's a big shift in how things are done with the advent of AI. And suddenly a lot of the things we were trying to push towards, suddenly, instead of being ahead of the game, we find ourselves behind. Increasingly, in recent months, people are coming to us that have been building AI-based systems, and they've been trying to build AI-based systems upon the machine-readable information that they can find. And they're coming up short. They're trying to piece together HTML documents, PDF documents, Word documents, scanned images, and have a system that gives good information. But even if you try it yourself and you ask something like ChatGPT a question, the answer you get back is the illusion of a good answer. It looks good at first glance. It's only when you start looking into it, you start realizing it's actually rubbish. It's been piecing together all the wrong things. And so they're coming to us and saying, we need structured data. Why isn't there structured data? And it's well, because the processes and procedures are changing at a slower rate than AI has been changing. And now suddenly we have to do a catch up. And this is one of the tensions that I don't know how we're going to resolve it, but I think it's going to need to be resolved quite quickly, because we can't keep building systems upon foundations that are just mud. It's all going to collapse. Things are accelerating. Obviously, the pace of change is accelerating, and we need to have much more solid foundations upon which we are building. So we really have to start thinking back to, I'm a member of the OASIS Illegal Document Committee. We've been pushing a Comontoso. We have USLM at the federal level. Those sorts of standards really need to start taking hold in order for the systems that people on the outside are trying to build upon the data which we are producing. We need to be aware of how people are using this data on the outside and make sure that we're providing information to them. And I go beyond saying, Kevin called it machine readable. I was talking to Kirsten once, and I said, we need to go beyond machine readable. It needs to be machine processable. It's not just being able to read the data, it's being able to understand it, being able to do something with it. That's where we need to get quite quickly.
Thank you so much, Grant. Very important point as well on having a digital first process, and not only a digital that would support the paper process. And I love this last thought on not having a machine readable, but a machine understandable, if you said correctly. So processable, sorry, yes, machine processable format as well. I love this idea. I'll take a note on that for us to continue this conversation later. And allow me to bring the next question to you, James. And I'd like to focus a little bit more on the realm of interparliamentary cooperation or parliamentary diplomacy, and trying to bring these two domains, these two realms together on parliamentary modernization and also parliamentary diplomacy. When we consider the successful stories like the US and Canada, what Grant is telling us, what you're telling us, how could other parliaments, other clerks, secretary generals that are watching this or are trying to acquire new experiences to modernize, what are the key factors related to the legislative process and the rules of procedure should these clerks evaluate from these other parliaments before trying to adapt these experiences for their own parliaments? So to summarize it, how can they absorb these successful experiences, internalize them into their own parliamentary system?
Yeah, thank you very much, Luis. Yeah, this is much more my domain. The CPA is built on the advantages provided by peer-to-peer learning amongst our very diverse range of parliaments. We know from speaking with the same institutions that this value is felt. However, whilst looking at other parliaments for inspiration, whilst that's valuable and it should absolutely be done, I think successful adaptation, and I think this is a key word, adaptation, it requires more than just attempting to replicate what's worked elsewhere. I said that we have a very diverse range of parliaments that's different geographically, culturally, but also procedurally. I think in terms of procedural compatibility, what works well in one parliamentary system may be at odds with the standing orders, conventions, bicameralism versus unicameralism in others. So if I think about legislation coming through, if there's a parliament that has a legislative drafting office where a lot of the legislation comes from, versus one where there's a high degree of private members' bills that come through. Having some sort of bill tracking system is going to be much more easy in one than it is in the other. So I think clerks and secretaries-general need to assess whether the innovation complements or conflicts with existing procedures. I again come back to this idea of the political will. I think reforms are rarely solely technical in nature. There needs to be that human will behind it. And I think one thing that's really important to consider here is when you look at innovations, I think sometimes there's a risk that efficiencies, which are attractive, are equated with speed, which I don't think is always very attractive. So if I think about things like AI-assisted amendment tracking, which can kind of speed up certain sort of elements of scrutiny. Well, actually, maybe speed isn't that attractive there. If you're speeding up scrutiny, what's happening with the quality there? So I think clerks and secretaries-general should ask who benefits, who might resist, and really is there that broad support for changes to be brought in. If there's will, I think those changes will be sustainable. If it's not there, I don't think it is. I think arguably the biggest and most obvious consideration is the resourcing. Even if one parliament successfully implements a tool of reform, the question has to be asked, do we have the people, the infrastructure, and the financial resources to also implement that. Again, I come back to the diversity of our membership. We have parliaments where both chambers have over 500 members, serviced by staff numbering in the thousands. We also have assemblies of 11 members, serviced by 1 or 2 people. Admittedly, that's the differences in extremis, but it still gives you the idea of just what kind of spectrum we're dealing with. So a successful e-petition system in one country, in terms of the resource demands, might be completely feasible. In others, very much not so. And in terms of us carrying out our benchmarking activities, I've been involved in assessments where the petition system has gotten completely out of control because there's simply not the resources, financial, human capital wise, to deal with it. And again, I come back to the sort of wider strategies that parliaments are operating under, whether it speaks to your objectives within the plan of the life of that parliament. You shouldn't be copying across tools and initiatives that don't properly align with your strategic plan. So in terms of what clerks and secretaries-general can do to ensure thoughtful adaptation, absolutely carry out a proper comparative analysis that's grounded in the local realities. Make use of pilot programs if you have the capacity to do that. I certainly know that many of our larger, more well-resourced parliaments are able to do some more experimentation. I know here in the United Kingdom, there's the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology that does a lot of exploratory work, which is very, very interesting. Not always so feasible for our less well-resourced parliaments. Yes, make space for internal reflection, make sure that that involves as many internal stakeholders as possible, and fundamentally stay outcome focused. Again, don't adopt technology for its own sake or as part of an artificial attempt to keep up. But yeah, again, I would just reiterate, for the CPA, peer-to-peer learning is vital. It's really what we're built on. But I think adaptation is a craft. So you need to balance the innovation and best practices that you're seeing, and that we also try to facilitate the sharing of with institutional self-awareness and procedural realities. So yeah, that's it from myself, Luís.
Thank you, James, for your considerations. And like just to highlight before I yield the floor to Kevin, one very important trait from the CPA, which for me makes it an incredible organization that makes this democratic accessibility of knowledge way more effective, which is the only interparliamentary multilateral organization at the parliamentary domain that includes both national, devolved, and subnational parliaments. Because in many cases, we see that our subnational legislatures, the devolved parliaments, they have so much difficulty in accessing this expertise, which is openly shared in other parliamentary organizations in the parliamentary domain. So I think it's absolutely fantastic that you create a space where clerks, not only from national parliaments, but let's say clerks from subnational legislatures as well, can exchange experiences in a collaborative manner. So I absolutely commend your work on this. And I'd like to invite Kevin to share your thoughts on this domain. Kevin, please feel free to use the floor.
Thanks, Luís. 100% agree with what you just said. And James, I think you took everything I was going to say, just said it a lot more eloquently. So thank you for that. And I echo certainly what you said. Just to add a little bit to that, my advice, you just very much need to consider how conformable a successful initiative from another parliament is to your own institutional culture and rules. We're all unique in that way. We might all have the same desired outcome or similar outcome, but we have to take what was successful in another parliament and, to steal James's word, adapt it to how it would fit within our own context and how we do business. I think another very important consideration that James touched on as well has to be the cost and availability of IT tools. And so while larger parliaments might have better experiences being able to go out and buy the bigger, best option, there's certainly relatable tools available. And certainly we work, I know, with pilot groups. We have pilot groups with the United States Senate on initiatives that we work on to see if it's something that we have built will work on their side of the Capitol as well. And James touched on this as well, but you can also take ideas and the case studies from other parliaments after they've successfully implemented something that you have an eye on, and you can craft them to fit your particular institutional needs. And so certainly a comparative evaluation is needed and can be done to achieve that goal. So for us, and here in the House, in the clerk's office, we listen to the positive and negative stories associated with various initiatives, and then use those to analyze solutions that we're considering for our own chambers. Not all of the solutions that work for the House may end up working for the Senate and vice versa, but there might be a solution in there somewhere with a few tweaks that we can implement to conform to our own rules and traditions. And I will say that just in the recent weeks, we've reached out to various state legislatures and foreign legislatures to seek advice on how they've instituted closed captioning options for within their own chambers, and are taking that feedback and seeing what might work for updating our solution that we have here inside the House. And so certainly no matter how big of a government you are, certainly good ideas out there from everywhere for successful tools that will meet the needs that every legislature experiences. Thanks, Luís.
Thank you, Kevin, for your considerations. It's very interesting to see this work in the House. The House has a very interesting program as well. It's the House Democracy Partnership, which works for a number of parliaments. We're in exchanging experiences, not only modernization, but parliamentary experiences. I remember from time to time you have delegations coming and going between you and these legislatures. So I absolutely commend this amazing work that you have been doing. And Eric, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts on this as well. I know parliamentary diplomacy is a topic very close to your heart, so please feel free to use the floor as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luís. Indeed, I was head of our International Affairs Office for 12 years, but these are certainly two tough acts to follow. I certainly agree with everything that's been said to date. Maybe a few other factors to consider when looking at technologies and processes from other parliaments. First, does the initiative take into account the distinct constitutional, procedural, cultural framework of your own parliament? And does it align well with the principles embedded in your own rules in relation to procedural fairness, or would it require such a major overhaul of your own standing orders to the point where the project just wouldn't be feasible anymore? Second, and importantly, and this is something actually James touched on a little bit earlier, does the Modernization Initiative preserve the clerk's duty of impartiality and all staff at the administration, but also the equitable treatment of all members and parties? So obviously you'll want to avoid any tools or processes that might be perceived or that might actually advantage one party or one MP over another. In such cases, it's best to be guided and led by the members themselves as to what types of changes they want to see. And third, you need to consider your own organizational context before implementing any change. Just because other parliaments have succeeded doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right fit for you. So through seminars like this in the past, I've witnessed some truly amazing innovations and technologies, but I know that not all of them would apply well to us here at the House of Commons, and I'm assuming it would be the same in the inverse situation, especially as James alluded to, given the vast differences in sizes of our parliaments. As clerks and parliamentary and leaders of parliamentary institutions, we're responsible as well for creating a culture that fosters innovation, curiosity, and continuous improvement. So part of this involves setting the right tone at the top. So visibly supporting thoughtful innovation, and especially when it challenges the way things have always been done, which is often a reason or excuse that's brought up in terms of why we should not do something. So we should both reward successful changes, but also learn that we can learn a lot from failed but well-intentioned experiments. So we shouldn't necessarily shy away from that as well. Further, innovation cannot be done for its own sake. It must be connected to a defined purpose and to your own Parliament's strategic plan. In our case, to better serve the members as one team. Leaders at all levels must continuously make this link and demonstrate how initiatives contribute to the strategic direction of your Parliament. Of course, none of this can be done without investing in your people and their skills. This is not simply a question of technology, but rather problem solving, process improvement, change management, and cross-functional thinking. If you invest in these skills and show that your organization values them, then you are also sending a signal to your teams that the culture supports innovation and continuous improvement. And finally, you need to consider how new projects might integrate with your current existing technological landscape. For instance, some 25 years ago at the House of Commons, we developed our own legislative system to manage our chamber and committee proceedings. In that sense, we need to consider how any new project or future project, our modernization initiative, would be incorporated into the existing systems, and consider the maintenance or custom supports that might be required in the medium and long term to ensure they remain in working order. In some cases, these maintenance efforts can take capacity away from your ability to innovate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. And you highlight very important points. I'll just tell you an anecdote about one of them with a very good friend, Mr. Bandeira de Mello. He was the Secretary-General of the Senate here in Brazil during the COVID pandemic. And when implementing the solution, he was very concerned that some senators would have some difficulties in logging into the platform to vote, or, for example, recovering their password, which, well, for younger people or for more digitally savvy people could be something very usual. But even for us, sometimes it's difficult to follow through the process. And he was very concerned. And at the first, they developed a backup plan for them to enable the participation of such senators in the virtual sittings, so that the senator wouldn't be hindered from participating in the session and voting because they were possibly not digitally savvy to use that particular platform. So that exemplifies what you and James very good pointed out, which is the role of the clerk and the Secretary-General to not only be impartial, but be seen as impartial to all members, to both the majority and to the minority representations in the parliamentary sitting. So I completely agree with your point, and I think it's of the utmost importance for the clerk and for the Secretary-General to not only have this careful deliberation, but to actively look into these possible loopholes that might hinder or the parliamentary representation of the members, both on the committees and on the floor, or any other representation that they would see in the parliament. I completely agree with all of your points. I'd just like to emphasize this because I think it's of the absolute importance. I'd like to invite you, Grant, now to share your perspectives. Would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Sure, Luís. I'm going to sound repetitive because I'm going to echo everything everyone's already just said. There is no single approach that is the right approach. Everyone's procedures are different, everyone's rules are different, everyone's traditions are different. How legislation is built around the world is different. There's no one way to solve this. But if I get to see a lot of systems that are being built around the world and various states and varying degrees of success. And if there's one thing that comes through that seems to identify a successful approach versus a not successful approach, is that there be an overarching vision, a master plan of sorts that people are working towards rather than just piecemeal work. When there's a master plan in place, then the modernization efforts all draw from that. And all those different projects make sense in the whole, even though they may take many years to put together. When we built the California system, the total system we built took about 10 years to build in bits and pieces. And it was very successful, and I think it was successful because of that. Because we didn't bite off too much at any one time. I think that's the key to, when you look at other systems, what characteristics, not what things did they do, but what approach did they take? That's the thing to understand, to see how they were successful versus not successful.
Thank you, Grant, for your considerations. And allow me to bring the last question to you. We're going to come back to one topic that I think was very important during this discussion, which is the role of the clerks in anticipating these future changes, or these future technologies that would be feasible for the parliaments to use, or more broadly, the technological changes that we see in the institutions. So my question to you is following up on what Kevin, Eric, James, and yourself said previously on having a rules base on principles, not on specific technologies or not on specific processes. For you as a technologist, as someone thinking about the future on how to modernize parliaments, legislatures, the legislative process, and legislative drafting, how can we and how can clerks anticipate and proactively prepare their parliamentary institutions to effectively be prepared for these new technological changes? And I'm talking here beyond artificial intelligence or remote liberation or any other specific technology. It's rather on my previous point, how to make the institution ready for the new technologies coming up in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So what is your take on that from the technologist's point of view?
Actually, I'm going to pick up just where I was on the last thing, and having, first of all, there needs to be a vision. There needs to be an overarching vision. There needs to be a master plan. But beyond that, to implement that, everyone needs to understand that, and there needs to be a mandate. It's not just a vision. Good to have a vision. There actually needs to be a mandate that the people feel to make that vision happen. And that also goes so far as to giving people the ability to make the changes that need to be made. Oftentimes we find ourselves, we'll find a vision in place, but the people we are working with don't know the vision, or don't feel empowered, or are too scared to actually try to make any changes that might help implement it. So everyone's been timid. I often say there are three things. There are rules and there are traditions. And then there are things that are in between that were once rules, and people have forgotten why they were rules. So they've become traditions, and now people can't get rid of them because they can't remember why they created them in the first place. And they get in the way. And no one feels, even though everyone questions it and says, this is a stupid tradition, this doesn't make sense, no one's going to step up and say, we should change this. So we end up spending an absurd amount of time implementing things for which there's probably no reason, if only the organization could collectively agree that it was time for that pseudo tradition to go away. And so it's a matter of all the people in the process knowing what the vision is, knowing that they are a part of that vision and that they are empowered to make that vision happen. Only then can you really have a successful outcome.
Thank you, Grant. You brought a very good point. Maybe in the past, some procedures were meant to, for example, bring more accountability, more transparency. But maybe in the last 200 years or 100 years, that has changed. I mean, that procedure does no longer represents an increase on transparency, on accountability, or efficiency. Rather, it's hindering other more effective ways for the public to to hold the Congress or the Parliament accountable that should be in place. I absolutely agree with this point. Eric, would you like to share your thoughts on this matter as well?
Sure. Yeah, no, my pleasure. So clerks and secretary-generals are, I think, uniquely positioned to see across the entire institution and champion long-term thinking beyond electoral cycles or individual technologies. So this, combined with a culture of innovation and continuous improvement that I mentioned earlier, the two combined, and by encouraging innovation at all levels, ideas can hopefully then come from all levels, including the front lines of service delivery, where we have staff working directly with members and their staff. We can also not forget the importance of members themselves in identifying what they value or need from Parliament to function as effective representatives and legislators. So to that end, the House of Commons has recently embarked on its Client Experience Project, which places members of Parliament at the heart of how we prioritize, design, and implement change. It also aims to support the House administration's prudent stewardship of public funds while providing our members and their staff with simplified, customized, and quality service. To that end, we developed a framework that was presented to our Board of Internal Economy, made up of members of all parties, last December. There are 4 pillars to this new project: governance, stewardship, operational efficiencies, and risk profile. So one of the key initiatives that's already underway that I wanted to highlight today is the development of our service catalog, which will include a full costing and clear standards associated to all services that we deliver to our clients, regardless of what it takes internally to do. So really what costs, all things taken into account. We are reimagining our processes, not as individual tasks that we complete, but as a cohesive whole that delivers outcomes for members, and centering them in the discussion as to where we can align resources to their priorities, how we can reinforce or modify appropriate service standards, and report on progress regularly throughout the parliamentary cycle. So this initiative will be supported by other related ongoing processes, including business intelligence initiatives, an audit of how we collect and react to client feedback, and continuous improvement initiatives that will allow us to find efficiencies in how we work and deliver services to members. So during the December presentation, the Board of Internal Economy agreed to establish a subcommittee so that it could be involved in the strategic review of services. So this direct feedback will be invaluable to the House administration and providing us timely information to facilitate the discussions with members and the parties. So while we're currently in an election period here in Canada, the administration is working to finalize the first version of its service catalog for presentation at a future meeting of the Board of Internal Economy once the new Parliament is up and going in a few months' time. So though your initial question, Luís, was about anticipating future technology changes or effectively preparing the Parliament to adapt to them, I wanted to use this example to highlight how we are putting members at the center of this discussion, so that technology is not used for its own sake, but rather insofar as it drives relevant outcomes for the members that we serve.
Thank you, Eric, for your considerations. Usually, when I mention about the incredible work of the House of Commons in Canada, I usually say the human-centric approach that the House takes, not first developing a specific technology to ask for people to adapt to use that particular technology, rather, okay, what are the needs of the people, the members, the staff, and the public, of course, and trying to use the best technology available to answer to those needs. And I'd like to touch on a very important point that you brought as well, on the importance of the clerk or the Secretary General in this role, and the continuity of the clerk throughout this time, because we know that this is not a few months project, this is not a one-year project, we're talking about a multi-year project that is going to transform the Parliament. So having the stability of the clerk and the position being appointed by the speaker, in some cases also voted by the floor, it's absolutely important to have this sense of continuity of this vision. Sometimes we see that in a few legislatures, the Secretary Generals, they change very often. which creates an additional challenge for the institution to keep a long-term planning for its modernization. So I absolutely commend you on these points and recognize what the amazing work the House of Commons is doing in this particular domain. I'd like to recognize Kevin now. Kevin, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Thanks, Luis. I just have a few brief comments. I'd like to pick up on what Grant said about how sometimes things that are rules and traditions just become things. Well, when you ask, well, why do we do this? Folks say, well, just because we've always done it, right? And there's really no good reason behind it other than we just continue it because we've always done it this way. I had a very engaging conversation earlier today with the Secretary of the Senate. We meet monthly and just talk about, she's new in her role, and I'm relatively new in this permanent role, or permanent for such that it is, but we both were reflecting on the challenge of addressing things that are, we're both committed to taking away that, well, we've always just done it this way, right? One thing that I've shared with staff is, yes, we do things because we've done things a certain way for a long time. However, that isn't a permanency to that. So if there's another more efficient, cost-effective way to tackle the same problem, let's talk about it, right? And that is everybody from the newest employee to the longest serving person, no matter what position you're in either, right? Because some of the best ideas, not everyone has the right answer. And so I think that was an important piece of just not settling for what has been done for forever. There's certainly opportunities in every situation to make things a little better. And to address the question specifically, taking an active and strategic participatory role, I think is key. Participating in panel discussions like this is one way to stay on top of what other legislatures are doing and learning from one another. I have a good half page of notes here that I've taken as I've listened to my colleagues on the panel. And ensuring that we have modern, flexible infrastructure in place to handle the change requests and new initiatives that are asked of us in an efficient and cost-effective way. And not just an infrastructure, but alluding back to that environment that leads the way on change, and having staff who lean forward, who aren't afraid to speak up, who don't settle for just, well, this is how it's always been done. Having that engaged staff, and I think seeing the willing ears of leadership it certainly encourages that type of behavior. Items, continuing our participation in the various working groups that exist to develop governance policies for data, accessibility, security, and vendor accountability. All of those things are important to being able to anticipate those future tech changes and making sure that we are prepared to adapt or conform to what's being asked of us. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you, Kevin, for your considerations. I'd like to invite James to share your thoughts on this point as well. James?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. Occupational hazard of going last, that I risk also repeating what has already been said. Yeah, I think one of the things that's key here is ensuring that horizon scanning becomes part of the institutional DNA within our parliaments. Really, horizon scanning was one of the core considerations for the CPA when we embedded technology and innovation within our strategic plan and engaging with parliaments on those topics. Yes, from the member perspective, looking beyond the next election cycle, but also trying to encourage parliaments not to always be those bastions of traditionalism and, as both Grant and Kevin said, places where things are done because they've always been done that way. And I think parliaments, through the clerks, through Secretaries-General, can build mechanisms to monitor emerging technologies and broader technology trends. They can partner with academic institutions, tech experts, innovation hubs to track these developments. There are a number of committees of the future that parliaments have. I know there's an excellent one in Finland, I believe, and I'll look to you, Luís. There's one in Chile as well that is very effective, and I believe the IPU actually runs a congress of committees of the future. So there's sufficient number of them to run a congress, and I think those could be key stakeholders in that horizon scanning. And I also mentioned the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology here in the United Kingdom that also does a lot of very forward-looking horizon scanning. So it's not only is it moving beyond this is what we do because we've always done it, it's even moving beyond this is what we have to do now. It's starting to think about what we might have to do tomorrow. I think Eric was absolutely right in terms of talking about investing in the internal capacity and agility. Parliaments are institutions, but the institution is ultimately the people that work within it. So I think upskilling staff, upskilling existing staff, but also attracting new talent. It may be that we parliaments do start to engage more technology savvy staff. I know that in Brazil, the tech division, the digital services is really quite large. I think it's probably the envy of many parliaments. I think, yes, absolutely right, as I think Grant mentioned, as did both Eric and Kevin, talking about thinking more strategically, not responding to trends in a sort of piecemeal fashion, having those structured foresight exercises, whether those are scenario planning, developing innovation roadmaps, future of Parliament dialogues like what we're having here. I think taking advantage of those spaces that are already provided by the likes of yourselves at Bússola Tech, Luís, ourselves at the CPA, the IPU, Parliamentary, a number of organisations. And I think on that point, no parliament needs to navigate the future alone. We spoke in the after the previous question about peer-to-peer learning. Participate in knowledge exchanges again, like this one. Clerks and Secretaries-General can pool insights, share risks, sort of combine learning. And I think that's something that actually the CPA realized we actually were failing on. We ran an artificial intelligence workshop last year in Singapore and invited only members of parliament. This year, we want to right that wrong and have members of the parliamentary administration join us for a much bigger workshop, because it is the administration, certainly the heads of the administration, the clerks and secretaries-general, who are key to this. They're the institutional knowledge. They're more often than not the ones that stick around after election cycles. So those of you who are members of the CPA, you should be hearing from us hopefully relatively soon about our plans for another technology conference later this year. But yeah, I mean, I think in short, the role of clerks and secretaries-general in this space, it's evolving. They're no longer, again, those procedural guardians, like how Kevin said, but now they are strategic navigators. So yeah, we're not just surviving the changes, but hopefully helping to shape it, at least as it applies to legislatures. So yeah, those are just my few additional comments, Luís. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for your additional comments. I see we are reaching the time limit for our discussion today. It has been a pleasure to be your moderator. Well, just to inform colleagues that have been asking me, this will be provided. The recording of this discussion will be provided shortly for everyone that wishes to watch it again. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, James. Thank you, Grant. Just before we go, I'd like to yield 30 seconds to each one of you if you want to say a farewell message or anything you'd like to share with the public. Very briefly, so we don't go much beyond the time. I'll do this alphabetically, if I may. Eric, would you like to quick start it?
Sure. Thank you, Luís. Maybe just to conclude, 3 things in terms of wrapping up and driving modernization. I talked about the importance of a good culture that encourages change and innovation, consistently reviewing processes to see where things can be addressed, fixed, improved, be it with technology or not. And perhaps third and final, technologies, AI or otherwise, use them, but use them strategically. So somebody once said to me, I thought it was a good analogy, actually used it at a different venue this morning. It's no good to have the best car if you don't know exactly where you're going. So again, keeping on track, keeping in mind what your clients are asking of you is really important. So thank you very much for having me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to share a little bit of what we're doing at the House, and certainly very beneficial to learn from colleagues elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your participation today and for the generosity of your time with us. Grant, would you like to share your final message as well?
Sure, thanks, Luis. I think I just pick up something my very first boss taught me way back at the beginning of my career. And he said, always think, are you computerizing the past or automating for the future? Always keep that in mind, computerizing versus automating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grant, also for your participation and being so generous with your time and your expertise. James, would you like to share your final message?
Yeah, thank you very much, Luis. Yeah, I think I can summarize my closing remarks as be strategic, be outcome oriented, be principled, rather than a slave to individual pieces of technology, and be inclusive as leaders of your administration. And yeah, just to close and say again, yeah, CPA is here to support all of our member parliaments. I'm sure we have a range of non-CPA members and CPA members on here, but this is a space that we're doing a lot of work in. Please do reach out, please do share examples of best practice, and please do share your needs and wants with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for your time, for being so generous to be here with us here. And I'd like to invite Kevin to close our panel today and share your final message.
Thanks, Luis. Nothing I can say here will top or equate to what my colleagues just said. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with everybody, and ditto to everything they said. It's all very important. So thank you.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you for your time, for being so generous here today and sharing your expertise.